This is a quick review of configuring the solver tool. Even though we did that in class, I'm going to replicate a couple of things that we worked on in class for Winston Shoe Company just as a reminder. So I already have the Excel spreadsheet open and available, and we just have the starting point of a volume of 200, 300, and 500 units respectively. And so all I want to do is show you how to get to the solver tool, make sure you understand the 5 elements that you have to configure. So we have the list of our ribbons up near the upper left hand corner of the screen here: home, insert, etc. The data ribbon is where you should have the solver tool listed, probably to the far right under analysis. Click on that and we have our little dialog box that we need to configure. So again, there are 5 elements that you need to get into the solver parameters box in order for this to work. First thing is to identify our target cell, generally speaking in the context of an income statement that will probably be operating income or maybe segment margin or something like that, some output variable, the result of, in this particular case, selling volume of product. So we're going to set our target cell, which in this case is I7. That's where operating income is located. We're going to try to maximize that, and we are going to allow a certain set of cells to change. The easiest way to handle that is to select the volume cells while holding down the control key. So hold down the control key and select each one of your individual volume cells. That will insert the correct cell reference as well as a comma in between each of those, and that's all we need to do. The fourth step then is to go into options and select assume linear model and assume non-negative. For sure you want to assume non-negative. In most cases you will want to have the assumption of a linear model as well. By and large, both of those are going to be required, although there are some circumstances where a linear model might not be appropriate. Assume non-negative will definitely be appropriate in all the cases that we're going to be working on, because essentially we're working with volume of output, and we just cannot have negative volume of output. So I have those 2 items checked. Click OK, and then I'm ready to add the remaining elements of my constraints. And we're going to jump directly to sort of the end of Winston Shoe Company so that you have a complete picture. And we have essentially 3 sets of constraints here that we need to add. One set of constraints is, or one constraint is the machine time utilization. Our machine time used cannot be more than, or must be less than or equal to, the machine time that's available. So that's our first constraint. And then we have some market demand constraints, which represent sort of the ceiling or the top end, the maximum that volumes can be. And then minimum supply, which is that management policy constraint. And that means that volumes need to be at least equal to 200 in each of the 3 cases, but must be less than their respective maximum demand. So this is a series of constraints, and so I'm going to tell Excel that the walking shoes has to be less than or equal to maximum demand, and I'm going to replicate that for each one of my product lines. And then I'm going to add in the minimum supply. I need to go in and change the mathematical relationship here, because now my supply or my output must be at least equal to 200. And again, I need to replicate that for each one of my product lines. And then the final set of constraints is that my volumes must be integer values. I'm not going to produce fractions of product. And so I do that for each one of my product lines as well. And you can see now I have a fairly extensive list of constraints, all relating to the actual description in the case. At this point, I can hit solve, and we see that solver found a solution, and I can keep the solver solution, click OK, and that's the final results. Again, what I wanted to demonstrate here was just the sort of step-by-step process of using the solver tool and creating the dialog box, or rather configuring the dialog.
I'm going to do this again for the recording. So what we're talking about is we're talking about animating things inside Blender. The first thing that you need to do an animation inside Blender, this is the standard Blender startup that you see here. You change it from model to animation. This gives you a lot of interesting windows, including a window that shows you, as you've seen in other places, the objects in the scene. This is the timeline across the bottom. Of course, you can't see the pointer, but across the bottom, that narrow thing where it says start 1 and end 250, that's the timeline. And what you need to do is you need to set this up so that you can, so we're going to talk about how to animate this cube. Well, to animate it, I want to make it in the camera view so I can see what I'm actually animating. The first thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that you're not going to animate more than you want. Down here where it says start and end, 250 means it's going to make 250 frames. That's going to take a very long time, and for a demonstration it's not worth it. In fact, that's way longer than what you'll have to do for the project. So what I want to do is I want to change this to, say, 30 frames, which will give me about a second's animation and will allow me to demonstrate what I need to demonstrate here. So you notice now that it's shrunk down to where the light gray is very short, just over a second. The green line is the timeline. So what you need to do is you need to set keyframes, and then Blender does the animation, does the interpolation between the beginning point and the end point of your set by keyframes. So this is the process for doing animation. I'm going to first put my block where I want it to be. So I select the cube here, and then I do a type G, which grabs it. I'm going to animate mine to where it's off screen, and then I'm going to animate it so that it goes across the screen through the viewfinder and then off to the right beyond the screen. So the process is you set the object where you want it to be in time. Then you set the keyframe. To do that, you hit the letter I, which pops this up. And for a change in location, which is what I'm doing this time, you use the LOC. Then you set the time at which you want to set the next keyframe. So I want to set the next keyframe later on, towards the end. So I've set the next keyframe time. Now I need to move the object where I want it to be at that time. So I can again grab the object. This time I'm going to kind of move it off to the bottom like that. Once it's moved there and you've set the time, then you set the final keyframe by doing an I location. What that does is it gives you an animation that moves it from where it originally was to where it is in the period of time that you've set. And you can watch this by clicking the play timeline, and you can see that it slides across just like I asked it to. So the two other kinds of things that you're going to need to know how to do, that's changing location. You also need to do the rotation, and you need to do a scaling change. So I'm going to go back to the very beginning in time. I'm going to leave that I'm going to have them all start at the same place. This time I'm going to rotate the cube. So instead of doing an I location, you do an I ROT, which sets up the rotation. Just like before, you decide when you want the rotation to begin, which is what we just did, and you decide when you want it to end. So let's see, you set the time that you want it to end. So I'm going to have it end about right there. And this time, so I want to do a rotation. So now I need to change the object. I need to rotate it where I want it to be. So I'm going to rotate it like that. And then finally set the end keyframe for rotation. What we should have now is it should be sliding and rotating, which you can see that it is now. So finally, I'm going to back up and start with the same location. This time I'm going to have it scaled. and we're going to scale it up as it moves across. So like before, you set it where you want it to be in space, you set it where you want it to be in time, and then you tell it you want to do a scaling. You want to do a scaling over time, a scaling animation. Now you can, then you set, after you set that, then you set where the end, where the key, second keyframe is for the scaling. Now I've chosen here, so I've done that. Now I need to scale it. I want to change the size of it, so I want to make it get really big. So now it's going to slide and rotate and scale as it goes once I set the final keyframe by doing an I scale. So what we should have now is a cube that slides, rotates, and scales in time. So that's probably enough and covers all the minor details of this. So we will stop the grab if I can find it. Yeah, okay, so now we're going to